Yeah. So you're gonna notice that, well, I don't know if you're gonna notice, but I lost all my subscribers. There was a red button on Chrome, and I don't know, there's something about a red button I gotta press or something, you know, like it's record or something. And it was something like, you know, get rid of all your subscribers. So I lost some subscriber links. My God. Please help me. Send me your links to your channel. God. Anyways, welcome to the news that gives you the news you want. Is it important? Who cares? If it's important to you, then it's important. That's all. Well, I guess that's my war game news. That's what's happening. You know what? Let's get on with the show, eh? Have a great show. Tony of Tony's Board Life is trying out his new Gimbal Plus Case Green intro. And the Phonetics Police Stigler on Stigler for Details number 16 North. Danao Front turns 5 NATO initial operations. And Stephen Dolges is unboxing an OCS game. Also giving you shenanigans. Well, giving you shenanigans. Shenanigans. You don't say giving you shenanigans. And Pax Romana, Greco-Persian Wars, turn 4. And on Monitor Side Chat, July 2021, he talks about publisher updates. Poindexter Games, Jay with London's Burning by Avalon Hill, August 16th, 1940. This is a playthrough, but an awesome playthrough. And visually unbelievable. And on Patrick's Tactics and Tutorial, Command and Colors, Ancients, 216, Sodium. And Mo of Mo's Game Table is doing a learning how to play with the designer Bruce Mansfield of the game by Compass Games called NATO. Also Whiskey Charlie episode 28. And Paper Wars issue number 98. Also Across the Bug River. And I ain't gonna say that. Something Volodymyr Volinsky. 1941. Hey, I think I said it. And NATO After Action Report. Mauro Faina is doing a special story of war and warriors on his Janitzero Live. And the OG was live with the handsome David Heath with On the Air with Lock and Load Publishing Season 3, Episode 1. Get your news of Lock and Load on Lock and Loads by On the Air. That's what I said. You know what I'm saying? Just get your news there. I mean, I'll tell you that I'm giving you the news that they're doing the news. What can I tell you? And on Legendary Tactics, we get a Twilight Struggle tutorial card by card. Also a digital playthrough of Brass Birmingham. And again, Twilight Struggle. How do you ... card by card. And for all you guys who have subscribed to GMT's, or I should say Volkorunke's Almoravid game and have no idea what he's talking about, well, Kings and Generals gives you a documentary on the Berber empires, Zirids, Almoravids, and Almohads. Huh? Stigler, can you say it? Can you say that? Huh? Homo Ludens, Fred Serval, my favorite Frenchman living in England. He's doing a Russian Revolution unboxing and a channel update with David Thompson. This war without an enemy and stuff. Probably not with David Thompson, but that's the way I read it. And like I said, bloopers. I'm human. And if any of you are into fly fishing and fly tying, you gotta check this guy out. Down by the river, fly tying videos is doing Lund's particular. This is a classic dry fly. And he's tying it. And he's amazing. And that guy called Dad versus Son is playing something Northwest Vietnam, I'm assuming, because he's pulling I'm not gonna say it, turn 4 and rap. Combat Board Games is unbagging rivets designed by Robert Taylor. This is an old game. John Krantz, Bill Thomas, for the latest company news, Compass Games is live with Town Hall episode number 27. Robe, the Hugh Hefner of war games, plays World War II miniatures, board games, and yes, media. He's thinking about combat supply. In the battle for? Check out the channel. Also, 3 gamers, I should say, play It Never Snows, and how to play Battle for Normandy, Landing. This is an after-action report, which was reported last week. But, being me, this is what happens. GIMPY of the GIMPY Gamer has on his channel Whiskey Charlie 72721. Read it loud. And also Companies of Heroes board game Going Big Part 8. And he's checking out Resident Evil 3, the board game Operation Mad Jackal Part 2. The Player's Aid are unboxing rifles in the peninsula from Tiny Battle Publishing, a game designed by, and this is a great name, remember this name, Gottardo Zancani. Jeff McAleer checks out Space Corps Ventures and Expansion for Space Corps 2025-2300 AD Anno Dominus. He is doing an unboxing. Yes, I was tripping on my words. A game designed by John Butterfield. You see, the bloopers, we leave them on. Why? Because I'm human. And Dr. Cody of the Discriminating Gamer checks out Trevor Benjamin and David Thompson's War Chest, Siege, and Expansion. And the man who is called, and doesn't need an introduction, STUKAJOE. He's live unboxing for the 1916 Steel Inferno Parts 1 and 2, and he's giving us a live preview of Brotherhood and Unity, a game by Compass Games. On Military History Visualized, Monte Cassino 44 from the German perspective. So he says here a disclaimer, he was invited by the Militärhistorisches Museum der Bundeswehr in Dresden in June 2021. Ha! Stigler. Comment on that. Yeah, I messed up. Militärhistorisch. Whatever. Hexes and Soldiers. Jason Cruz is going crazy. As if crazy is a good thing. Yes, it is in my world. Miniatures, 7 weeks of them. 447 figurines, if you call them that. Counterattack is continuing its playthrough of Ukraine 43, a game designed by Mark Semenich, published by GMT, Turn 7. The man famously known as Calandale, Enrico Viglino, does a circle, and then he gives us a review of Asgard and a rap, also the beginning of Asgard. That is the intro and parts 1.
Hello everyone, this is Michel Sorbet from the Polish YouTube channel Wojennik TV. Here is my traditional roundup of the content published on Wojennik TV during the last week. On Sunday I started with a long video which lasted almost 2 hours because this was an after-action report of Castle Eater. I have published a whole playthrough of this fascinating game which covers a very fascinating event, a battle which took place in the final stages of World War II in Europe, when a bunch of German Wehrmacht soldiers led by an SS officer fought alongside American troops and also French prisoners of war to fight off an SS attack against a castle set in the Austrian mountains. So quite a strange, a bizarre setting, but a very fascinating one. And the game, designed by David Thompson, released by Downversion Games, enables us to recreate those events. So I have published a whole playthrough of this game. I really had fun with it, and I hope that everyone who takes a look at this playthrough will also enjoy it. On Tuesday, the video in English, and this time it is an interview with Marc Rodrigue and Marco Poutre, the designer and the developer of Bayonets and Tomahawks from GMT Games. So we had a talk concerning this game, concerning this fascinating game, concerning in general also the process of designing a game, the process of finding a publisher and of developing a title. This was a very interesting talk. Thank you once more both to Marc Rodrigue and also to Marco Poutre for agreeing for this interview. So if you're interested by this subject, but not only by Bayonets and Tomahawks, but in general by designing games and the process of developing them, this might be something interesting for you. On Wednesday, an unboxing of a game which I was really excited to open because I have opened the box of Unsettled from Orange Nebula. This is a game which I backed on Kickstarter in 2020 and I really anxiously awaited its arrival. Here it is. I received the core game alongside with additional planets, and I opened the content of this box to take a look how the final components of it look. This is not a war game, obviously. This is a game, a survival game in which we are space travelers, space explorers, and we are unexpectedly thrown onto an unknown planet, and our main objective is to survive on it, learning how different things work on this planet, how to use to our benefit some things which we find. So this is an interesting exploration game, but at the same time also a development game, a game with a lot of twists. I'm really looking forward to my first play. Finally, on Friday, the Polish review, and this time it was the review of Lepanto 1571, published by HEXES Edizioni. I decided to present you how this game looks, how it works, then I, as usually, explain what are my thoughts concerning this title. This is obviously the Polish version of the review, but an English version of the review with the same elements will soon follow. So those were the 4 videos published on Wojennik TV during the last 7 days. I wish you a terrific weekend, have a great gaming, and see you next time.
What's happening on the big board? Well, you're gonna know now. He's playing Modern Battle Tank British Army of the Rhine. I'm assuming that /7 means part 7. And Artie of ARDWULF'S LAIR is currently drinking Coal Ela. I guess that's an Islay malt. It's a 12-year-old. I haven't tried it there, Artie. You know, hint, hint. But anyways, he's currently clipping The Coming Storm. ARDWULF'S LAIR, ladies and gentlemen. Jan Heinemann of Let's Play History is doing Fields of Glory Tour Herschlagfagen. Ah, my God, I ruined that. Herschlag Final. Haha, I said it right. Also, he's playing Strategic Command World War II War in Europe and Fields of Glory 2 Medieval. Hans. Rough Swordsman Wargamer, learning to play Atlantic Chase from GMT and published by, I should say, game designed by Jeremy White. Tutorials number 8 and 9, which leads me to believe there were previous ones. And I hope I'm going to say this right, Prostaguous, the Orwell Wargamer, Wargame Review Absolute Emperor by Osprey Games. KilRoyWasHere! He's doing a lot of work, ladies and gentlemen. Check it out. Kilroy goes off the shelf on fantasy war games, obviously, and also Coffee with Kilroy, well, Avalon Hill Flyer circa 1981. And he goes a deep dive World War II German submarine warfare. Also, unboxing and introduction of Space Corps Ventures, a game published by GMT and designed by none other than John Butterfield.
Hello all! Today, Kilroy goes off the shelf on fantasy war games. Now, what is a fantasy war game? Can a fantasy game be a war game? I don't want to get into the debate over what is a war game, but on one end of the spectrum, there's a very restrictive definition of war games in that it has to be, historical, military, conflict. Some even go so far as to say it has to be hex encounter. So I don't want to get into that debate of what is a war game, but to the extent that fantasy war games can be war games, I want to talk a little bit about them. So what I have in front of you is Beast Lord. I mean, this goes back to the late 70s, early 80s, which, fantasy war games go back that far. SPI and Avalon Hill, which I'll show a few, have fantasy war games. And in the vein of being a hex encounter and combat results table and the like, well, Beast Lord kind of fits into that mold. I mean, the rulebook looks like a war game rulebook. I mean, it's 32 pages, charts, rules, exceptions, combat factors, the whole 9 yards. The map itself, hex encounter, look at that. With your combat's results table down there. Of course, you have some spell charts because, it's fantasy, you got to have that. A unique aspect of Beast Lord was that it had not only a strategic map, it had a tactical map. So you can do your tactical battles on different maps depending on kind of the terrain that you were talking about. And that's kind of similar to what the old Avalon Hill game did with, which I don't have the Avalon Hill game, but I have the remake from Valley Games of Titan. Titan had a strategic map board. Really not much of a map board, but it was more of a kind of this board that you moved around on. And then the individual terrains, you had combat depending on the individual terrains. And that was originally done, well, I know there was a version done by Avalon Hill. This is the Valley Games version. But I found that interesting that you had a strategic and a tactical map. And this was very much a war game by design with, you know, movement and combat and, you know, combat results table and the like. So that is good old Beast Lord. You also, or I also have Elric, which is based on the books by Michael Moorcock. A great series, interesting series, different kind of fantasy series. But this was a war game that brought in a lot more spells and had this kind of chaos concept, because that's a very big theme in the Elric series, is the chaos. And so there was, you know, chaos and order battling, and that is played out in this game as well. SPI, not to be outdone, I have Ragnarok. Of course, SPI did a lot of Tolkien type games, War of the Ring, and games around that, or, you know, war games around that and different battles. This is one I have, which is dealing with the Norse gods. Speaking of fantasy games of that era, Divine Right. Now, this isn't the original. TSR did one that was in a smaller box, and I played the heck out of that. That was, if you've seen one of my episodes on Grail games, that was kind of my Grail game. I never owned it until I bought this version, but I played the heck out of it with my good buddy back in high school and in college. And very much a war game. Hex encounter, moving around, doing combat, but of course, you know, had to add in all the fantasy tropes to it. This is the 25th anniversary version, and you know, is good. I still have some fond memories of that old original game. So if you want to get into issues on whether something is a war game or not, or fantasy can be a war game, you know, I turn to none other than Battle Lore, because Battle Lore is based on the Command and Color system that was originally done in Battle Cry. And I don't know if anybody's saying that Battle Cry and Command and Colors Ancients and Command and Colors Napoleonics and Command and Colors Medieval, and now there's the Samurai version. I don't know if anybody's really seriously saying those are not war games. Maybe they are. But if those are war games, well, this is a war game too. Again, this is based on fantasy and has fantasy miniatures. Actually, this is kind of based on medieval 100 Years War, but instead of using historical figures, they threw in orcs and dwarves and, you know, your different fantasy tropes into that. But again, based on the Command and Color system, this was the original edition. There was a second edition that came out. And in fact, I think they actually took this system and kind of went to Game of Thrones and did kind of a version with that as well. Pushing the boundaries a little bit more on war games, but clearly a fantasy war game, but not sure if you want to call it a war game. But you have War of the Ring, not the old SPI version, but this is the new kind of Euro version, or Ameritrash Euro version of War of the Ring. Area movement, minis, so you got a little bit of plastic toys in there, but has a very unique system of how the dice give you actions. Does an excellent job of recreating, you know, this story of, you know, the Fellowship trying to, you know, dispose of the ring, the Nazgul forces of Sauron trying to find them, but also waging a war across the landscape with the forces of Middle-earth and the allies of Middle-earth. So there's card play, there's this unique dice action, there's plastic minis. So, I mean, it goes beyond Risk. It kind of gets into Risk on steroids. You know, and speaking of Risk, you know, Risk isn't to be outdone either on whether it's fantasy or not. You have Risk Godstorm, which is basically Risk, but with all the gods, not just the Norse gods, but the Greek gods, the Egyptian, and as well. And this is your kind of the gods come into play and have kind of divine intervention and help you win some certain battles. But again, still more of an area control war game. Interesting aspect here, you have an underworld aspect. So your units don't die, they just go to the underworld and you battle in the underworld, and you get some points for controlling some aspects of the underworld, and might be able to bring some of them back depending on your god's powers. So there's some of my fantasy war games. Again, not trying to settle the debate on whether fantasy games can be war games, but to the extent they are, here's just a look at some of the fantasy war games that are out there. What do you have?
Another week, another show. Hey, please, if I missed saying your channel here, and I usually do say it, please send me your link. And also, for anybody who's got new channels, send me your links. I know some people do, and I put them up, and sometimes there's nothing new on that show, or I don't know, maybe I'm screwed up big time. Also, check out the interview I'm going to have with Bruno Sinigalio. That should be really interesting, especially coming from me. And I think he is the foremost authority on the Battle of the Bulge in the world. And I'm lucky to have him, and you guys are lucky to be a part of that. Check out Artie's channel. Actually, check out my channel, where you have everything you want to know about war games we were afraid to ask. We had a really good time this time. And we're thinking of stuff. And it's going to be good stuff. So keep checking out stuff. Have an awesome weekend. Thank you very much for subscribing, for liking, for supporting this show. It's amazing. Really, it is. And again, thank you very much. Have a good weekend. And you know what? Smoke a pipe. Do something. Ciao!
Hi, this is Paolo of WBS Games. I would like to show you some of the most important components in the game Win Victory Among the Clouds Above, which is currently on Kickstarter. Let's start with the maps and the counters. Here you can see one of the maps. This is the map that is used for the channel or even for the med. And you can see some of the many aircraft models in the game. There are more than 40 different models. And some of the targets available. In this case, of course, there are sea targets. So you have submarines, cruisers, merchant ships. You also have destroyers, and so on. Let's go to the second map. I remind you that the maps in total are 3, but they're double-sided, so you actually have 6 maps you can combine. You can see some more models. You can see other targets, artillery tanks, flak, and just look at the details of these counters. They're really amazing. They're really nice, and there are so many liveries, so many different colors, and it will take you really a long time to pilot all of these models. The third map is used for the Italian front. You can see the Alps in the background, and here you have some more aircraft. There are many different nationalities. You have Italian, French, British, German aircraft in the game, and some more targets, trains, machine guns, infantry, and also airfields. Now let's go to another very important component of the game, which is the dashboard. Now the game stresses a lot the concept of energy management, which is a very important concept, especially if you're a fighter in the First or in the Second World War. Here you can check out and control your speed, your altitude, any damage, and also the experience level of your pilots. This is all, and I hope you liked it, and I hope you'll join our Kickstarter campaign. Cheers.
If you get hold of 2 magnets and you push them, you can feel this pushing between them. Turn it around the other way and they slam together. Now, what is it, the feeling between those 2 magnets?
What do you mean, what's the feeling between the 2 magnets?
There's something there, isn't there? I mean, the sensation is that there's something there when you push these 2 magnets together.
Listen to my question. What is the meaning when you say that there's a feeling? Of course you feel it. Now, what do you want to know?
What I want to know is what's going on between these two bits of metal.
Magnets repel each other.
And well, then what does that mean, or why are they doing that, or how are they doing it?
You're asking.
I must say, I think that's a perfectly reasonable question.
Of course, it's
ask.
a reason. It's an excellent question. Okay. But the problem that you're asking, you see, when you ask why something happens, how does a person answer why something happens? For example, Aunt Minnie is in a hospital. Why? Because she went out and she slipped on the ice and broke her hip. That satisfies people. It satisfies, but it wouldn't satisfy someone who came from another planet, knew nothing about things. First, you should understand why, when you break your hip, do you go to the hospital? How do you get to the hospital when the hip is broken? Well, because her husband, seeing that the hip was broken, called the hospital up and sent somebody to get her. All that is understood by people. Now, when you explain a why, you have to be in some framework that you allow something to be true. Otherwise, you're perpetually asking why. Why did the husband call up the hospital? Because husband is interested in his wife's welfare. Not always. Some husbands aren't interested in their wife's welfare when they're drunk and they're angry. And so you begin to get a very interesting understanding of the world and all its complications. In order to if you try to follow anything up, you go deeper and deeper in various directions. For example, you could go, why did she slip on the ice? Well, ice is slippery. Everybody knows that, no problem. But you ask, why is ice slippery? That's kind of curious. Ice is extremely slippery. It's very interesting. You say, how does it work? You could either say, I'm satisfied that you've answered me, ice is slippery, that explains it. Or you could go on and say, why is ice slippery? And then you're involved with something, because there aren't many things as slippery as ice. It's very hard to get. Greasy stuff, but that's sort of wet and slimy. But a solid that's so slippery, because it is in the case of ice that when you stand on it, they say, momentarily the pressure melts the ice a little bit, so you got a sort of instantaneous water surface on which you're slipping. Why on ice and not on other things? Because ice expands water expands when it freezes, so the pressure tries to undo the expansion and melts it. Is capable of melting it, but other substances contract when they're freezing, and when you push them, they're just satisfied to be solid. Why does water expand when it freezes and other substances don't expand when they freeze? All right? I'm not answering your question, but I'm telling you how difficult a why question is. You have to know what it is that you're permitted to understand and allowed to be understood and known, and what it is you're not. You'll notice in this example that the more I ask why, it gets interesting after a while. That's my idea, that the deeper a thing is, the more interesting it is. And we could even go further and say, why did she fall down when she slipped? That has to do with gravity. It involves in all the planets and everything else. Never mind. It goes on and on. Now, when you ask, for example, why two magnets repel, there are many different levels. It depends on whether you're a student of physics or an ordinary person who doesn't know anything or not. If you're somebody who doesn't know anything at all about it, all I can say is that there's a magnetic force that makes them repel, and that you're feeling that force. And you say, but that's very strange, because I don't feel kind of force like that in other circumstances. When you turn them the other way, they attract. There's a very analogous force, electrical force, which is the same kind of a question. And you say, that's also very weird. But you're not at all disturbed by the fact that when you put your hand on the chair, it pushes you back. But we found out by looking at it that that's the same force, as a matter of fact. The electrical force, not magnetic exactly in that case, but it's the same electrical repulsions that are involved in keeping your finger away from the chair, because everything's made out of its electrical forces in minor and microscopic details. There's other forces involved, but this is connected to electrical forces. It turns out that the magnetic and the electric force with which I wish to explain these things, this repulsion in the first place, is what ultimately is the deeper thing that we have to start, that we can start with, to explain many other things that looked like they were, everybody would just accept them. You know, you can't put your hand through the chair, that's taken for granted. But that you can't put your hand through the chair, when looked at more closely, why, that involves these same repulsive forces that appear in magnets. The situation you then have to explain is why in magnets it goes over a bigger distance than in ordinarily. And there it has to do with the fact that in iron, all the electrons are spinning in the same direction. They all get lined up, and they magnify the effect of the force until it's large enough at a distance that you can feel it. But it's a force which is present all the time and very common, and is in a basic force of almost, I mean, I can go a little further back if I were more technical, but at an early level, I just have to tell you that's going to be one of the things you'll just have to take as an element in the world, the existence of magnetic repulsion, or electrical attraction, magnetic attraction. I can't explain that attraction in terms of anything else that's familiar to you. For example, if we say the magnets attract like as if they were connected by rubber bands, I would be cheating you, because they're not connected by rubber bands. I shouldn't be in trouble. You'd soon ask me about the nature of the bands. And secondly, if you were curious enough, you'd ask me why rubber bands tend to pull back together again, and I would end up explaining that in terms of electrical forces, which are the very things that I'm trying to use the rubber bands to explain. So I have cheated very badly, you see. So I'm not going to be able to give you an answer to why magnets attract each other, except to tell you that they do, and to tell you that that's one of the elements in the world of the different kinds of forces. There are electrical forces, magnetic forces, gravitational forces, and others, and those are some of the parts. If you were a student, you'd go further. I could go further. I could tell you that the magnetic forces are related to the electrical forces very intimately, that our relationship between the gravity forces and electrical forces remains unknown, and so on. But I really can't do a good job, any job, of explaining magnetic force in terms of something else that you're more familiar with, because I don't understand it in terms of anything else that you're more familiar with.